The wedding music was still playing when the bride suddenly stopped walking. Every face in the ballroom turned. Her father had just stepped forward to take her hand, but she looked past him, straight toward a man sitting alone at the back, a single dad in a worn navy suit. And then the most powerful woman in the room stood up from the head table and walked directly toward him. "Daniel," she said, her voice trembling. "Why didn't you tell me?" Daniel Carter looked down at his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, sitting beside him with a paper flower in her hair. "I didn't come here to ruin anyone's day." The billionaire woman stared at him as if she had just seen a ghost. But Daniel had never met her. At least, not the way she thought. 3 hours earlier, Daniel almost hadn't come at all. The invitation had been lying on his kitchen counter for weeks. "Megan and Thomas request the honor of your presence." Megan was Daniel's younger sister. And despite being the only family he had left, she had spent the last year barely speaking to him. Not because they had fought, because Daniel had disappointed her. Or so she believed. 3 years earlier, after his wife died unexpectedly, Daniel left his job as a construction foreman to raise Lily. The work paid well, but the hours were brutal. He couldn't bear leaving his little girl with strangers from dawn until midnight. So he bought an old delivery van and started making local deliveries. It was exhausting. Some weeks, he barely earned enough. And Megan hated seeing him struggle. "Dad worked his whole life to give us more than this," she'd once told him. "And now you're throwing everything away." Daniel never argued. Because deep down, part of him wondered if she was right. On the morning of the wedding, Lily found him ironing his shirt. "Are we still going?" Daniel looked at the clock. They were already late. His van had broken down on the highway, costing him 2 hours and most of the money he'd planned to put toward Megan's wedding gift. "We'll go," he said. "With a gift?" Daniel smiled sadly. "We'll figure something out." But they didn't. By the time they reached the hotel, Daniel had nothing except an envelope containing $20 and a handwritten note. Lily held his hand as they entered the glittering ballroom. Crystal lights hung from the ceiling. Waiters moved silently between tables. Everyone looked polished, wealthy, successful. Daniel suddenly felt every wrinkle in his old suit. At the gift table, he quietly slipped his envelope between boxes wrapped in gold ribbon. Then he found his seat. Alone. Megan had placed him at table 12, beside distant co-workers and people he didn't know. Lily noticed immediately. "Why aren't we with Aunt Megan?" Daniel forced a smile. "Because this table has the best view." It didn't. But Lily nodded. Then came the first surprise. During dinner, an elderly woman at the next table accidentally dropped her purse. Daniel bent down, gathered her things, and noticed her oxygen inhaler had rolled beneath a chair. He reached for it before anyone else saw. The woman thanked him quietly. Across the room, an elegant silver-haired woman watched everything. Daniel didn't notice her. He was too busy cutting Lily's chicken into tiny pieces. Later, while everyone stood to watch Megan dance with her new husband, Lily whispered, "Daddy, can we leave soon?" Daniel looked toward the dance floor. His sister was smiling. For a moment, he remembered their mother dancing with Megan in the living room when they were children. He swallowed hard. Just a little longer. Then the second surprise came. Megan approached his table. Daniel stood immediately. She looked nervous. "Can I talk to you?" He nodded. She glanced at Lily. Privately, Daniel's heart sank. They stepped into the hallway. For several seconds, Megan said nothing. Then she sighed. "Thomas's family is asking questions." "About what?" "About you." Daniel stared at her. "They think it's strange that my brother drives deliveries." He laughed once, but there was no humor in it. So, Daniel, please don't make a scene tonight." His face changed. "I wasn't planning to. I know. I just mean," she struggled for the words. "You know how important this day is to me." Daniel looked at his sister for a long moment. Then he nodded. "I know." That was all. No argument. No anger. But when he returned to the ballroom, he told Lily they were leaving. Lily looked disappointed. "Did I do something wrong?" Daniel immediately knelt beside her. "No, sweetheart. Never think that. But Aunt Megan is sad." Daniel looked toward the dance floor. "No. Sometimes people are scared. And when people are scared, they say things they don't really understand." Lily hugged him. And that was when the third surprise happened. The elderly woman whose purse Daniel had picked up appeared beside them. She wasn't alone. Behind her stood 2 hotel managers. And the elegant silver-haired woman. The same woman who had watched Daniel all evening. "Mr. Carter?" one manager asked. Daniel frowned. "Yes." The older woman stepped forward. Would you sit with me for a moment? Daniel looked confused. I was actually leaving. Please. There was something in her voice that made him stop. Lily sat beside him as Daniel followed the woman to an empty corner of the ballroom. My name is Eleanor Vale, she said. Daniel knew the name. Everyone did. Eleanor Vale owned Vale Holdings, one of the largest real estate and development companies in the country. Daniel stared at her. Then she placed an old photograph on the table. It showed a younger Daniel, covered in dust, standing beside another man at a construction site. Daniel's expression froze. Where did you get that? Eleanor's eyes filled. The man beside you was my son. The music in the ballroom seemed to disappear. Daniel slowly sat down. Her son, Michael, had been Daniel's best friend 15 years earlier. They had worked construction together. One afternoon, a partially collapsed structure trapped Michael beneath a beam. Daniel had stayed inside the unstable building while everyone else waited for rescue crews. He had held Michael's hand, talked to him, kept him awake, until help arrived. Michael survived, but Eleanor said he never fully recovered from the injuries. And years later, he died from complications. Daniel had attended the funeral, then quietly disappeared from the family's life. I tried to find you, Eleanor whispered. Daniel shook his head. I didn't think there was any reason. There was. She opened a folder. Inside were letters, dozens of them, written by Michael during his recovery. Daniel stared at his own name. Eleanor touched one gently. He said you saved his life twice. Daniel looked up. The first time was the accident, she continued. The second time was afterward, when he wanted to give up. Daniel remembered those nights, sitting beside Michael's hospital bed, talking about anything except death. He had never thought of it as something special. He was my friend. Eleanor nodded. And you never told anyone. Daniel looked toward Lily. I didn't do it for a story. Eleanor studied him. Then came the fourth surprise. Megan was standing nearby. She had heard everything. Her face crumpled. Daniel didn't know how long she'd been there. She walked toward him slowly. Why didn't you ever tell me? Daniel looked at his sister. You were 14. You could have told me later. He smiled faintly. Later, we had other things to talk about. Megan began to cry. Not dramatically, quietly, like someone finally realizing how badly they had misunderstood the person they loved. I thought you gave up, she whispered. Daniel looked down at his hands. Sometimes giving something up is the only way you can hold on to something more important. Lily reached for his hand. Megan saw it and understood. The fifth surprise came when Eleanor offered Daniel a job. Not charity, not money, a job. She had discovered his old construction records and knew he had once been one of the most respected site supervisors in his company. I need someone to inspect safety conditions at my new projects, she said. Someone who cares more about people than profits. Daniel stared at her. He didn't answer immediately. Then Lily tugged his sleeve. Would you still pick me up from school? Everyone laughed softly. Daniel looked at Eleanor. One condition. She smiled. I had a feeling there would be one. Lily comes first. Then, Eleanor said, you're exactly who I need. Daniel accepted. But the most important moment happened afterward. The bride's father had already given Megan his hand. Yet when the music began again, Megan walked across the ballroom toward her brother. She held out her hand. Daniel looked confused. For what? For my first dance with my brother. Daniel shook his head, embarrassed. I don't dance. Neither did Mom. That broke him. Not completely. Just enough. He stood. And under the crystal lights, the single dad who had arrived feeling like the smallest person in the room danced with his sister while his daughter watched from Eleanor's side. Daniel never became a billionaire. He didn't need to. He got a steady job with decent hours. He picked Lily up from school. He rebuilt his relationship with Megan. And sometimes, on difficult days, he still drove his old delivery van. Not because he had to, because he remembered what it taught him. You can sit alone in a room full of people and still matter more than you know. Because kindness is not always applauded when you give it. Sometimes it disappears quietly into someone else's life. And years later, when you least expect it, it comes walking straight toward you.